So of all the reasons you don't believe in God, what would you say is the most important one?
Religion is always in conflict with science, and it is always losing.
Why can't the claims of religion and science coexist? I've explained to you in these videos a Christian worldview that is not based on literal interpretations of Genesis, and is consistent with modern science.
I recognize that what you believe has an internal consistency to it, but I still don't find it persuasive, because of where it came from. You see, religion has a terrible track record.
You mean the bad things that people have done over the years in the name of God?
Well, yes, that's part of it. Especially at the leadership levels. For example, would you agree that several of the popes did terrible things?
Yes.
Well, then, doesn't that make any religion that came out of their institution highly dubious?
It calls into question the idea that popes can be relied upon for infallible teaching. But the institution you have in mind, the rich, powerful, and politically connected Catholic Church, emerged centuries after the time of Christ. The bad popes didn't invent the Christian religion, nor did today's TV evangelists. If you look at the Gospels, you'll see that the corruption of religious institutions was of central concern to Jesus. He called out the Jewish leaders of that time, the Pharisees, for hypocrisy. Jesus, properly understood, is not an inspiration for religious persecution. He was one of its victims.
Fair enough, but to get back to my main point. The real problem with religion is that it seeks to explain things, like lightning or the night sky, in non-scientific terms. Science provides better explanations, they conflict with religious ones, and eventually the religious side loses convincingly. Either it refuses to acknowledge this, as is the case with fundamentalists, or it retreats to an ever narrower set of claims, as in the Christianity that you seem to hold. Your God occupies the gaps in scientific knowledge, and as such he is always shrinking.
I don't think this is a fair characterization at all. God isn't found in current gaps in scientific knowledge. He is found in things that are outside of science, such as the soul, moral truth, the ultimate origins of things. These questions are not scientific at all. I would submit that these things are real, yet they are not material and as such are outside of the reach of science, permanently.
Isn't saying something is outside the reach of science the same as admitting there is no evidence for what you believe?
No. There is evidence, but it is not scientific. By scientific I mean in the sense of reproducible results, where you and I can look at some phenomenon, measure it, and compare observations. The evidence for the soul is not like that.
If it's not scientific, what kind of evidence is it?
I observe my soul from the inside. The observation is very real and it is far more direct to me than the things I observe indirectly through reason or even through the senses. Nonetheless, the observation is purely qualitative, so it cannot be shared the way scientific data can. I can try to put what I see into words, and hope that you find it helpful in observing your inner self.
I suppose we are hitting an impasse. I mean, what you are saying cannot be verified or falsified.
I agree, and of course this means these statements are not scientific. But I am of the opinion that they nonetheless describe something that really exists. And if one concludes the soul really exists, it is not much of a leap to believe in God.
Even if I granted the idea of the soul, and a generic sort of God, it is a long way from there to Christianity, and again there is no evidence.
Again, I would say there is evidence, just not of a scientific sort. The testimony recorded in the New Testament is evidence. You and I just disagree on the credibility of the witnesses.
So to summarize, are you saying that religion as you understand it is not hostile to science, but makes claims about realities that cannot be analyzed scientifically?
Yes, that's a fair summary.
Okay. So I have a follow-up question. Why do polls show that scientists are significantly less religious than the general public?
Science has ground rules, one of which is that you cannot offer supernatural explanations, nor can you offer first-person accounts of things you observe inside yourself that other people cannot verify or reproduce. Such things are off-limits. And rightly so. As a practical matter, Scientific collaboration is more productive when people exchange information that can be quantified and verified.
This is all true, of course, but what does it have to do with the point I raised?
Well, in my view, difficulty in relating to matters of the soul is an occupational hazard faced by the scientist, because of these ground rules. The scientist is more likely to experience lack of faith in the same way the coal miner is more likely to experience lung disease.
That is a rather distant analogy.
Perhaps a closer one can be found in finance. Financial professionals build models of the markets or the economy. There are ground rules for what can go into models like this. For example, a model is not supposed to incorporate personal opinions on the character of executives or politicians, or how much they personally like the prospects for specific companies. The models need to be objective and understandable in the same way by many people. So they must be mathematical. There are good reasons for building models this way, but the things the models leave out are important features of reality. People who use the models every day are at risk of coming to believe the models to be realistic to a much greater extent than is warranted.
That reminds me of the story of those Nobel Prize-winning professors in the book When Genius Failed.
Exactly. And I would submit that scientists as a whole, as a consequence of the method they use, have more trouble than non-scientists of seeing certain realities that are inadmissible in scientific work.
But aren't scientists as a group more likely to be smart than non-scientists? And doesn't it make them more likely to be right on all sorts of questions, including those about the soul or God?
Yes to your first question, and no to your second. We've already gone over in another video how the inverse correlation between IQ and religious belief can be explained from a Christian perspective.
One last question. Doesn't it trouble you how many other Christians take views that are outright ignorant of or contradictory to the legitimate claims of science?
Yes, I find it troubling. It's clearly damaging the quality of dialogue that exists on the topic of religion and science.
Shouldn't you be more vocal in condemning fellow Christians who argue against evolution and such?
Well, I should be vocal in expressing my own views. That's what I'm trying to do with these videos. But condemning is the wrong word. Ignorance is a bad thing, but not everyone has the luxury of a good education or a strong intellect. To condemn someone for ignorance is as wrong as condemning someone for poverty or illness. Besides which, it isn't effective. The hostility between atheist and fundamentalist is a vicious cycle. Looking at it from the outside of both camps, it seems that the more each side views the other not just as misguided but as a threat, the more each side will be hardened in the point of view simply because it is the opposite of their enemy's point of view. Each side loses some of its ability to think clearly, and this is sad for everyone.